Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. When my wife and I bought our house last year, we were thrilled to finally have a place of our own. It was a cozy little bungalow with a decent-sized backyard that backed onto a wooded area. The neighborhood seemed really pleasant, and all our neighbors greeted us warmly when we moved in. Well, all except one family who lived in the house behind ours. The wife gave us a quick hello before rushing back inside, while the husband didn't even bother to look up from his phone when we waved. We figured maybe they were just shy or keeping to themselves, but we would soon realize they were anything but shy. A few months after moving in, I noticed a truck pulling into their driveway one Saturday morning, loaded up with lumber and roofing materials. Curious, I wandered over and asked the husband what the construction materials were for. "Oh, we're just building a little storage shed in our backyard. Should only take a day or two," he replied casually. I nodded, thinking nothing much of it at the time. People built sheds in their yards all the time, and with the wooded area right behind their property, it made sense they would need a shed for gear like rakes, shovels, and other outdoorsy equipment. Work on the shed progressed rapidly, and soon it was completed. It was bigger than I expected, nearly the size of a one-car garage, but I figured they must have a lot of stuff to store. Everything seemed fine until about 2 weeks later when I was mowing the lawn in my backyard. As I pushed the noisy mower near the back fence, something caught my eye. Just on the other side of the fence, barely 5 feet from the property line, stood the newly built shed. I stopped mowing and stared in disbelief, walking over to examine it up close. There was no doubt about it. That shed was definitely encroaching onto my property by at least 5 feet, if not more. I felt like someone had just slapped me across the face. How could our neighbors do something so brazen? They hadn't even consulted us about building a shed so close to the property line. I was fuming as I marched over and knocked loudly on their front door. The husband answered, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. "That shed you built is on my property. You can't just build over the property line without permission," I said angrily. The husband just shrugged, completely unfazed. "Don't worry about it, man. It's just a few feet over the line. No big deal." I stared at him, flabbergasted by his casual attitude. "No big deal? You're trespassing on my property. That shed needs to be moved back immediately." "Yeah, that's not going to happen," he scoffed. "We're not taking apart a brand new shed. Just get over it." He then promptly closed the door on my face. I stood there absolutely stunned for a few moments before rage bubbled up inside me. I pounded on their door again, but no one answered. When I told my wife what happened, she was just as upset as I was. We looked up property laws in our area and confirmed that the shed was a clear violation of local codes. Our neighbor had no right to build anything that encroached on our land. We decided to send them a formal letter requesting they move the shed within 2 weeks, or we would take legal action. Of course, our letter was ignored. At this point, we were fed up. We hired a lawyer who wrote them another letter clearly spelling out the law. It stated they were trespassing and could be sued for damages and forced to remove the shed. A few days later, we looked out the window to see the husband outside, pushing the shed inch by inch away from the fence, scowling the entire time. It seemed he finally got the message, but he only moved it a couple feet. Now it still encroached 3 feet onto our property. We were about ready to blow a gasket. I stormed outside to confront him. "I thought you got our lawyer's letter. That shed needs to be moved completely off our property." He crossed his beefy arms. "Yeah, I'm not doing that. A few feet ain't hurting nobody. I suggest you let it go before things get ugly." I shook my head in disgust. "You can't threaten me. This is my land that you are illegally occupying. Get that shed off my property before our next step is taking you to court." He glared at me menacingly before stomping back inside, muttering curses under his breath. My worry that this situation was going to turn nasty was growing by the minute. Over the next week, tensions escalated dramatically. We discovered our neighbor rummaging through our mailbox and appearing to monitor our coming and going. Menacing notes were left on our door, with not-so-subtle threats if we continued to make trouble over the shed. My wife was now afraid to be home alone. It was time to take more drastic measures. We hired a surveyor to get the exact property boundaries on record. He confirmed the shed was still encroaching 3 feet onto our land. Armed with the survey results, we had our lawyer file papers in court, suing our neighbors for trespass and demanding immediate removal of the shed. Things got even uglier when they were served the court papers. One night I awoke to the sound of smashing glass. I ran outside to see that several of my car windows had been smashed. Though I had no definitive proof, I was certain our neighbors were behind it. The court date finally arrived, and it was clear from the get-go that the judge was not sympathetic to their case. When questioned about ignoring our request to remove the shed, the husband threw a tantrum, calling me an obscenity, and saying he could build whatever he wanted on his own property. The judge harshly reprimanded him and presented the survey as clear evidence that the shed was illegally occupying our land. He ordered the neighbors to move it immediately, or face hefty fines. It was deeply satisfying to see the look of defeat on the husband's face as the judge ruled in our favor. He knew he was licked. The very next day, a moving truck arrived. We watched in relief as the awful neighbors loaded up the shed and transported it away. They avoided eye contact, clearly resentful about having to remove it. In the end, we decided not to pursue any further legal action. The threat of fines was enough to get them to comply, and the judge made it clear that any future harassment would lead to criminal charges and possible jail time. My wife and I learned a valuable lesson. Don't be afraid to stand up for your rights, even if your opponent tries to intimidate you. In the end, justice prevailed over our entitled neighbor's brazen trespassing, and we could finally enjoy our backyard again, free of any unwanted structures. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This story is about a good friend's grandfather and how he dealt with his inheritance in a very unique way. He had 2 sons, and each of them also had 2 sons. In the last half year of his life, my friend and I visited him every morning and every evening. You see, he did not want to go into a retirement home, and apart from getting ready in the morning and in the evening, he did not really need help. Now I need to explain something real quick. Back in the day, we still had mandatory service in the Army for 12 months, but there were several ways around it. I will only explain the most common way since it is connected to our story. You see, instead of going to the Army, you could say you refused to go for ethical reasons, which was really just a formality. You simply wrote a 1-page essay explaining why being in the Army would violate your personal ethics, and they pretty much had to accept it. But that meant you had to go into civil service. Civil service could be any kind of job that, in a wider sense, serves society. These jobs ranged from kindergartens to retirement homes, and anything in between, like hospitals, homes for the physically or mentally disabled, Meals on Wheels, pretty much anything you can imagine. You would be paid for that time the same amount of money you would get in the Army, and had the right to certain perks like a free room, health insurance, work clothes, etc. The same stuff any soldier gets. Plus, since soldiers get free food, you either got free food or a food allowance. I did my time in a retirement home, and it was an awesome experience. I think a job like that really widens your horizons as a young, arrogant person and really matures you, showing you what is actually important in life. Back to the story. I had just finished my time in the retirement home, and for 1 year, I wanted to do odd jobs and make some money. Then one of my best friends came to me and told me he needed my help. His grandpa could no longer do everything by himself, but really only needed help in the morning to get ready and in the evening. Since I had learned how to do this from real professionals, he asked me to show him so his grandpa did not have to go into a retirement home. He later admitted that grandpa said he would rather kill himself than get into a nursing home, and he seemed really serious about it. He did not tell me at the time since he did not want to pressure me into helping like that, which I really appreciated. He was one of my best friends, and I really liked his grandpa. When I was younger, I did not have a grandpa, but we visited him all the time, and I became his unofficial 5th grandson. So of course I said yes. The original plan was to show him for 3 weeks, and then observe him for another 3 weeks. Then he would do it on his own. But we ended up doing it together for over half a year. Then Grandpa had a stroke and died within 2 days in the hospital. 2 days later, my friend asked me to come with him to the lawyer where the last will would be read. His grandfather had specifically asked that his will should be read the day before he gets buried, which is quite unusual but not illegal as such. I asked why he wanted me there, and he told me the lawyer had officially invited me since Grandpa had left me something as a thank you for my service. I was a bit embarrassed, but also happy that Grandpa had thought so highly of my service, he even put me in his last will. Now, my friend's dad is an entitled a-hole, and the same goes for his uncle. We arrived there and went into the room. My friend is F. You get 3 guesses who me is. Entitled is ED, and entitled uncle is EU. ED, to me. Why the hell are you here? I know that Dad called you in jest, his 5th grandkid, but this is for real family. EU. I bet the little gold digger hoped he would get some money in the will. Me. I was asked to be here by the lawyer, take it up with him. I have no idea why I am here. ED. If you pulled something to get to his money, I will sue you so hard even your kids will still need lawyers. F. Show some respect and stop shouting. I know you two did not really give a damn about your dad, but show at least a minimum of respect. EU. How dare you talk like that to your elders, you little crap? F. You two get exactly as much respect from me as you showed your own father. None. He really shouted the last word, and it finally shut the two up. We sat down and still had to wait for the other 2 grandkids to arrive. The 2 sat right behind us, and what they talked about really made my blood boil. Apparently, they had both gotten new cars, new jewelry for the wife, and had planned a huge holiday. All that was paid for by credit, and they had planned to pay for it with the inheritance. None of them said even a word about missing him, being sad that he died. Nothing. Only me, and money, money, money. They seemed to be in a competition to see who could spend the inheritance the fastest the way they planned away the money. Then finally, we were all there, and the lawyer read out a short letter. What I'm telling you here is a much shortened version, but the real thing was several pages. But it boils down to this. In recent years, I more and more realized that some people in my family cared a lot more about me than others. I am especially disappointed in my 2 sons, but I wanted to be really fair and not biased, so I came up with a point system. Letter phone call, 1 point plus 1 extra if it is very long. Visit, 2 points per hour, plus 1 point per hour of travel to me and back. Helping me out with something, 3 points per hour. This is the final result over the last 3 years of my life. ED, 8 points EU, 10 points EU kid 1, 150 points, EU kid 2, 133 points, brother 288 points, F 7,341, me 5,883. My lawyer has already liquidated most of my assets except the house. Once it is sold, the money will be divided by the points, so we know what each point is worth, and then every person gets a share of the money according to his points. For about a minute, you could hear a pin drop, then both ED and EU started shouting at the same time that they knew we would have pulled something, and this would never stand. Of course, they tried to sue, EU, his kids, and ED together, but they lost, and there was a secret clause. Not really secret, it was simply not read to us that day, so nobody realized it was in there since we all assumed everything was read to us on that day by the lawyer. In the will that if someone sues against the will, he loses his share of the inheritance. It took nearly 3 years until all the lawsuits were over. I was blown away when we finally got the money. I'm not naming a sum, but it was way more than I felt comfortable accepting, so I wanted to give at least some of it to the other 3 grandkids. But my friend finally convinced me to accept by saying to me, "You cared for him when he needed you, without expecting anything for it, which makes you 10 times more his family than any of those jerks." They got what they deserved. The next one is a petty revenge story. I live in a small cul-de-sac that has another small cul-de-sac branching off from it. I sometimes park my fully branded work van, a VW Caddy, which is the same size as a VW Golf, in the other cul-de-sac, even though I technically don't reside there. I do this when there's no parking available near my house. It's only about 10 meters away, and I can still see it from my house. There's a family that lives on the corner, and they dislike people parking where I do. This is because it's opposite their driveway and requires extra effort for them to get their car on and off the driveway. If I'm not parked there, someone else will be. This is entirely normal, legal, and socially acceptable in the UK, where roads are narrower, parking is scarcer, and cars are generally smaller compared to other countries. I'm referring to you, Americans. As a result, they frequently call my workplace to complain about the van being parked there. I only use that spot when the spaces outside my house are occupied, usually by people living in the other cul-de-sac. They also call other companies to gripe about vehicles parked in that perfectly legal on-street parking. They never approach the vehicle owners directly. They simply make phone complaints if the vehicles display company details. We've all started ignoring their complaints. It's become an inconvenience, but they persist despite the ineffectiveness of their actions. They must realize their strategy isn't working. Just to clarify, I park the van on the opposite side of the road. I'm not obstructing the driveway in any way. It simply makes their driving a bit less convenient. The parking is entirely legal. In the UK, residential areas usually lack parking restrictions unless imposed by the local government. Anyone can park there, provided there are no restrictions, and the vehicle is taxed, insured, has a valid MOT, and isn't causing an obstruction. The folks on the corner complain to companies just because they can, and due to their possessiveness about the road in front of their property. They never confront individuals about parked cars face to face. This family's house borders the road entrance, and their bushes have become overgrown, as they do every year. Despite multiple requests from fellow residents to trim them, they've never done so, insisting that it's the council's responsibility, even though the bushes are part of their garden. My response to this was to start lodging complaints every week on the Fix My Street app. Since the hedges obstruct the road, the council conducted an inspection. Coincidentally, I was home during the inspection and spoke to the inspector. It turns out they've received multiple letters and warnings over the years about this issue, which they've consistently ignored. Due to budget cuts, the council lacked the resources to address it in recent years. However, because I complained and the hedges were indeed obstructing the road, the council was obligated to take action. They issued a warning, giving the owners 28 days to trim the hedge. Otherwise, the council would intervene and send them a bill. While it would cost around £300 for the owners to do it themselves, the council's charge would be £2,000 due to administrative and legal costs if they had to do it. Naturally, they disregarded the warning and council workers arrived with chainsaws to trim the bushes. I wasn't home during the incident, but my neighbor recounted that the wife in the house became extremely upset with the workers, who simply ignored her. The police arrived, spoke with the council workers, reviewed the paperwork, and explained the situation to the woman, after which she went back inside. Regrettably, I didn't witness the aftermath, but I imagine they were quite furious. There have been other issues with this family that I won't delve into here. They're known for being unreasonable and causing problems for other neighbors. They fit the Karen stereotype perfectly, especially the mother. My neighbors all share my sentiments and are pleased that these people have finally faced consequences. No one else in the neighborhood has an issue with parking on this road except for them. The rest of us are mature enough to share. If you intend to nitpick and be impolite, kindly find something else to occupy your day. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back in the 80s, in an act of superlative financial wisdom, my parents bought an old ramshackle Victorian house. Our neighbor had quite a story to tell about that old house. According to her, her grandfather owned a farm on a small island. One day, a rich guy from Boston who was in the market for a summer cottage gave him a good offer for the island, and then left back for Boston. Over the following winter, the farmer disassembled his farmhouse and hauled it via ox cart at low tide over to a larger island where he reassembled it into a new house. When summer came again, the rich guy from Boston returned to summer in his new place and was surprised to find nothing but an empty hole in the ground. He confronted the farmer about the unexpected non-existence of his house and was told, "You bought the island, not the house." Eventually, the reassembled house was bought by another family with way too many cats, and then by my parents, who proceeded to spend far too much time and money renovating the place before eventually selling it and moving away. Maybe my neighbor was pulling our leg, I don't know for sure. Some evidence. Our neighbor showed us old photos of the original house. It had a completely different floor plan than our house, but the old farmer apparently reassembled it in a different configuration. While playing hide-and-seek in the weirdly extensive closets of the house, we found a bunch of interior timbers with old exterior paint all over them. Perhaps those timbers used to be on the outside before the original house was dismantled? My father walked out to the proposed site of the original house and found a depression in the ground that had once been a cellar, exactly where our neighbor said the house used to be. However, in that part of the country, there are a lot of old abandoned farms in the woods. I just looked up a real estate website, and it says our old house was built in 1900, which fits the timeline that our neighbor gave us. The next one is an entitled people story. I have 3 nieces and a nephew whom I was quite close to. They frequently spent weekends and every special occasion with us in our home. As of writing this, I haven't seen them for nearly a year. My sister-in-law and I were both employed as caregivers to elderly homebound individuals. Due to our job experience, we took turns assisting our grandfather-in-law with dementia. In March, he received a credit card statement with over $21,000 in transactions. When confronted with the bill, sister-in-law admitted she had taken and used the credit card. On my next visit to assist him, I drove him to the sheriff's office to file criminal charges despite sister-in-law's promises to pay off the debt with the bank. Those charges are still pending. Sister-in-law was fired and blacklisted from working with elderly people and has cried that should be punishment enough. Once charges were filed, the children were no longer allowed to spend any time with me, my husband, or our sons. She's run through several jobs and was recently fired from another one for, as you guessed it, stealing. Just before Halloween, I switched jobs and noticed my Social Security card was missing. I then received a new credit card in the mail that I had not applied for. Sister-in-law currently resides at my previous address, as we gave her the house where she currently lives. I often receive credit card offers in the mail, and they've been sent to that address on numerous occasions. I was immediately suspicious, but with nothing to go on, I let it go. On November 21st, I received a credit alert that I had opened a PayPal credit account and paid another PayPal user $250. I contacted the creditor as well as local law enforcement. Sister-in-law is adamant she's had nothing to do with it. I'm still waiting for paperwork from the bank to verify her contact information on the application. She's dug in her heels and announced that the children are not allowed to spend any time with us for Christmas, unless all charges against her are dropped. This will be the first Christmas my youngest son hasn't spent with his cousins. He's heartbroken. I'm just pissed. I don't understand how she musters the audacity, editing to answer some questions because this blew up. She is my husband's brother's wife. She turned 30 this year. Her kids are 11, 7, 4, and 2. My boys are 18 and 10. I froze my credit after I received the first credit card. Not 100% sure how the transaction still went through. My thought is, she had all the necessary information and could easily have unfrozen it. It's taking so long to nail down charges because attorneys are nitpicking over which charges she spent versus which were legitimate. Aside from bills, some purchases she made were $800 tickets to a Backstreet Boys concert, a $700 Venmo to her BFF, a $1,600 boudoir photo shoot, $600 at Victoria's Secret, $450 in deliveries from her favorite local Mexican restaurant, $400 ATV excursion in Cozumel, Mexico on a cruise her husband paid for, and $650 from a website that sells designer scrubs. Nothing was purchased for her kids. Update. At a court hearing this past week, sister-in-law was sentenced to serve 20 days in jail, suspended until after the first of the year, and must pay $8,000 in restitution. Grandfather-in-law passed away today after suffering another stroke. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.